So the Tome case raises the question of when the prior consistent statement has to occur. We learned from the Duncan case that for the first prong of the admission of prior consistent statements, that is when they are offered to rebut a charge of a recent fabrication, that of course there has to be enough, the cross-examination has to cross the line into alleging not just a failure of memory or perception, but that it actually alleges that the person is lying. Now, once it's done that, then how far back can the person offering the witness go in terms of bringing consistent stories? Does the consistent statement have to be before the alleged motive to fabricate? Now, it would almost make sense. It almost seems kind of crazy to ask this question, because once you have been, say, bribed, let's say bribery is the motive for the fabrication. Once you've been bribed to lie, wouldn't any statement after the bribe then be motivated by the bribery? Yes, it would seem so. But remember, the reason we're actually asking this question at all in Tome, because of the very low threshold for admissibility under the rules of evidence. Remember that relevance has this incredibly low threshold, that all you have to show is that the piece of evidence you're offering makes a fact that is of consequence somewhat more or less likely, has any tendency to make a fact of consequence somewhat more or less likely. So let's say that you're bribed, and then after the bribery, you tell 20 people the same story you tell at trial. Does that have some tendency to make the testimony at trial more accurate? Well, yeah, the fact that there are 20 very consistent versions of the story would tend to suggest that the story is accurate, because you would think the person would mess up the story at some point along the way, that there would be inconsistencies within the 20. But it's not great evidence. Clearly, the better evidence would be the evidence that or the prior consistent statement before the bribery, before the motive to fabricate was developed. But the question in Tome is, do we have to find the consistent statement somewhere before the motive to fabricate occurred? And the majority in the Tome case, Justice Kennedy says, yes, you do. And the reason he says that we don't apply the standard very low level threshold for admissibility that we normally have in the rules of evidence is because at least this prong of the rule for admission of prior consistent statements has a very particular purpose: to rebut a claim of recent fabrication, motive to fabricate. And if that's the case, then in order to do that, he says, you've got to have something pre-motive. You have to have something before the bribery. And if that isn't the case, then you're just piling on consistent stories that a person could have run around and told the same lie 45 times and then come to court and then propped it up with the previous lies. So the court says that if you are offering a prior consistent statement under 801 D1B, little I, if you're offering it for that purpose, then you have to show that the prior consistent statement predated the motive to fabricate. Now we're going to get into our next video this new provision that was added to prior consistent statements, which doesn't involve a response to a motive, a claim of fabrication, and the rules will there be different, and they'll be very, very fact specific. But know this, and be very clear about this: if what you're doing with the prior consistent statement is rebutting a claim of recent fabrication, then the consistent statement has to predate the motive for that fabrication.